Some things on the internet are not meant to be found. They lurk in the shadows, waiting.
You should leave. I mean that. I know how that sounds, like the opening line of a cheap horror story, but I am not trying to scare you. I am trying to warn you. The mistake has already been made, and if you are hearing this, it means I made it worse by deciding to talk. These stories were not meant to be told out loud. They were meant to stay written, fragmented, buried in half-deleted notes and unsent messages. There is a difference between thinking something and giving it a voice. I learned that too late. Every time I say the details, something changes. Not dramatically, not in a way you could easily point at, just enough to let me know I have been noticed. You can feel it too, can't you? That slight tightening in your chest. The sense that this is already going somewhere it shouldn't. That is not atmosphere. That is not mood. That is the first consequence. I used to believe danger had to announce itself. A sound, a shape, a threat you could name. Now I know better. Sometimes danger waits for permission. Sometimes it waits. If you stop listening now, nothing happens. I think. That is what I keep telling myself. But if you stay, if you let me finish, then you are part of this. You become proof that it spreads. I should stop here. I should delete this and pretend none of it ever happened. People have been asking me for a long time to tell these properly. Not the cleaned up versions. Not the ones where I laugh it off or change the ending so it sounds survivable. They keep saying they want the real ones, the details I skipped, the parts one said were boring. I used to think that was curiosity. Now I think it was recognition. Waited because pretending worked for a while. If I joked about it, if I framed it like coincidence or stress, people nodded and moved on. That was easier than watching their faces change when they realized I wasn't exaggerating. Dark humor became a shield. Cynicism became an excuse. As long as I sounded detached, nothing followed me home. But the messages kept coming. Strangers describing things I never posted. Comments disappearing after they asked the right questions. Accounts that went silent the same night we talked. I told myself it was algorithms, coincidence, bad timing. That lie only works until it doesn't. Here's what finally broke me. There are 3 stories. 3 incidents. Different cities. Different years. Different reasons for being there. But the feeling was identical. The same pressure in the air. The same moment where everything normal stopped applying. And every time, the ending was the same. It didn't chase. It didn't explain. It waited. If you've ever had something happen that didn't fit any category, you already understand why I'm doing this. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to pay attention. Leave your theories if you have them. Compare notes. See the pattern. I ignored that feeling for years, until silence started answering back whenever I tried pretending nothing was wrong about it again now. The first time it happened, I still believed everything had an explanation. The first time it happened, it was the most boring night of my life. That's not exaggeration. That's the part that still bothers me. Nothing about it felt special enough to remember, let alone fear. It was a night shift, the kind you agree to because the pay is a little better and the expectations are lower. Sit still. Stay awake. Write things down if anything unusual happens. Nothing ever does. I was working security at a small medical office complex on the edge of town. Not a hospital, not an emergency room. Just clinics and administrative buildings that shut down by 6. By 10, the place was dead. The lights were on timers. The doors were locked. My job was to walk the perimeter once an hour and spend the rest of the time pretending the chair didn't hurt my back. There were rules, of course. There always are. Most of them were obvious. Check the locks. Don't let anyone in. Call it in if you see someone on the cameras between midnight and 5. Don't approach them alone. That was it. No explanation. No follow-up. Just a line on a laminated sheet everyone signed without reading twice. I asked my supervisor about it once. He shrugged and said it was old policy, probably written after some lawsuit. Use common sense, he told me. You won't need it. He was right, in a way. I didn't need it. I ignored it. The night itself was painfully normal. I watched the cameras. I scrolled my phone. I listened to the hum of the HVAC system cycling on and off like a mechanical breathing pattern. Every hour, I stood up, stretched, and walked the same path past the same doors with the same locks. Nothing changed, which is why the small things stood out when they did. At 1:17 a.m., I heard a door close somewhere in the building. Not slam, not creak, just the soft, final sound of a door settling into its frame. I remember checking my watch because it was specific. Sounds usually weren't. I told myself it was the vents. Old buildings make noise. That explanation fit well enough to let me sit back down. At 2 o'clock, one of the hallway cameras flickered. Just a frame drop. The image snapped back immediately. I laughed at myself for watching it too closely. You start seeing patterns when there aren't any, especially on nights like that. At 2:43, the motion alert went off in corridor C. That was odd, but not alarming. Sometimes bugs triggered it. Sometimes a bad sensor did. I pulled up the feed expecting nothing. Instead, I saw a man standing at the far end of the hall. He wasn't doing anything. He was just there. Tall, hands at his sides, facing the camera. The lighting washed out his face, turning it into a blur of pale tones. For a second, I assumed it was a reflection or some glitch layered over the feed. Then he shifted his weight. I checked the timestamp again. 2:43 a.m. All exterior doors were still logged as locked. I leaned closer to the monitor and felt that familiar irritation of a night shift problem that meant paperwork. I picked up the radio and called my supervisor. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice casual. "I've got someone inside the building." There was a pause. Then, "Are you sure?" "I'm looking at him," I said. "Hall C." Another pause. Longer this time. "Don't approach," he said. "I'm calling it in." That was the moment I should have listened to the rule. Instead, I stood up. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Or pride. I told myself it was probably a janitor who forgot to sign in. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down the hall, rehearsing what I'd say to keep it light. By the time I reached corridor C, it was empty. No footsteps. No doors opening. Just the same quiet hallway I had walked through 100 times before. I turned back toward the camera, already annoyed, already planning how I'd explain the false alarm. That's when the lights behind me shut off all at once. When the lights went out, they didn't flicker or fail in stages. They shut off together, clean and intentional, leaving only the red exit signs glowing at the far ends of the corridor. My flashlight suddenly felt too small. I told myself it was a power cycle, a timer glitch, anything mechanical that didn't require panic. I radioed again. "Lights just went out in C," I said. My voice sounded thinner than I expected. Static answered. Then my supervisor's voice, delayed and distorted. "Stay where you are." That should have been comforting. It wasn't. The lights came back on less than a minute later. Same brightness. Same hum. No alarms. No emergency override. I laughed, once, too loudly, and walked back to the desk, already rewriting the memory into something forgettable. T317. The motion alert went off again. Same corridor. Same camera. The man was there again. Except this time, he was closer to the lens. Close enough that I could see the outline of his mouth, stretched into something that might have been a smile. I waited for him to move. He didn't. He was. I called it in. I documented it. I followed procedure so carefully it felt like superstition. The log timestamps were correct. The locks still read secure. Nothing else was wrong. At 4 o'clock, the alert triggered again. The man stood in a different hallway. At 4:41, he was back in C. At 5:12, he appeared outside the door to the security office itself. Each time, he was closer. Each time, the lights behind him dimmed just slightly, like the building was conserving energy for him. I stopped walking the halls. I stayed seated, eyes locked on the monitors, waiting for someone to explain it. No one did. I started noticing patterns I wish I hadn't. He only appeared during my patrol windows. He never crossed cameras I wasn't assigned to check. When I skipped around, he didn't move at all, like he was waiting for me to remember my responsibilities. The worst part was the silence. No banging, no threats, no attempt to enter the room. Just patience. Perfect, inhuman patience. At 5:48, my supervisor called back. His voice sounded wrong, flattened, like he was reading from something. "Police are busy," he said. "You're almost done. Just sit tight." That was the moment the rule broke. Not the one on the laminated sheet. The real one. Someone was supposed to come. Someone was supposed to intervene. At 6 o'clock, my shift ended. The door handle to the office turned slowly on its own. The door handle to the office turned slowly on its own. I stared at the handle, telling myself it was pressure, temperature, anything but intent. The radio crackled once, then went silent again. On the monitors, every camera froze on the same frame. The man's face now close enough that the blur suggested eyes where eyes should not have been. I tried the keyboard. No response. I tried my phone. No signal. The exit signs flickered, not off, just dimmer, as if the building was slowly forgetting how electricity worked. I whispered hello, hating myself for it. Somewhere down the hall, something whispered back, copying the sound but not the shape of the word. That was when I understood the schedule wasn't random. It was training, watching, learning when I would look away, when I would stand up, when I would finally act. Whatever it was, it didn't need permission anymore. It only needed my participation. I remembered laughing at the rule during training, remembered signing my name, remembered assuming someone smarter had planned for this, and felt a sinking certainty that the only reason it had waited so patiently was because I had always been expected to open the door. That realization settled in heavy, final, and absolutely irreversible in that moment. I stood up, hands shaking around the flashlight, and made the decision to open the door myself that I didn't open the door all the way. I cracked it, just enough for the light from the office to spill into the hall. There was no one there. No footsteps retreating. No shadow slipping around the corner. The hallway looked exactly like it always had, clean and empty and wrong in a way I didn't yet have language for. I stepped out anyway. That was the second mistake. The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded final. The light stayed on this time. I walked backward, eyes scanning every doorway, every intersection. The building felt larger, stretched, like the distance between walls had been quietly edited. I don't remember running, but I remember being outside. Cold air, dawn bleeding into the sky. My car already unlocked, engine starting on the first try. Nothing followed me. That part confused me more than if something had. I reported it. Or at least, I tried to. The police took a statement that turned into polite smiles halfway through. My supervisor told me I was overtired, that night shifts mess with your head. The cameras, they said, showed nothing unusual. No man, no outages, just me pacing and staring at empty halls. They offered me a few days off, then fewer shifts, then none at all. For a while, I convinced myself they were right. Stress, imagination, a bad night stacked on top of another bad night. That explanation held until small things started happening. I'd wake up at 2:43 a.m. without an alarm. Lights in my apartment would dim when I stood up too quickly. My phone would show missed calls with no numbers attached. Friends noticed changes before I did. I stopped sitting with my back to doors. I checked reflections too often. I memorized exits in places I didn't plan to stay long, like grocery stores and waiting rooms. The worst part was the waiting. Nothing dramatic. No escalation. Just the sense that something had learned enough and no longer needed to practice. Sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I could feel the same pressure I felt in that office, like a tension without direction. I stopped telling the story after that. I learned what not to say out loud. I learned how to keep certain memories flat and quiet. It almost worked. It followed rules I still don't understand. Almost. Because every few months, someone would message me, asking about a night shift, a hallway, a rule they didn't understand yet. And every time, I felt that same tightening in my chest, that same certainty that what happened to me wasn't finished, wasn't unique, and wasn't done choosing who came next. That was only the first time I tried to forget after that. Not in a dramatic way. I just flattened the memory, filed it under things that don't help you sleep, and moved on. The problem is memory doesn't like being ignored. It changes when you stop checking it. Details slid around. Times blurred. Some nights I remembered doors that never existed. Other nights I forgot faces I was sure I'd seen. I started searching online, quietly, late at night. I found posts that described the same rules, the same waiting, the same calm patience. Hallways, schedules, warnings written like jokes. When I bookmarked them, they vanished. Accounts deleted, threads scrubbed, like someone was cleaning up after us. If any of this feels familiar, I need you to tell me. Not for validation, for pattern recognition. Comment what rules you were given, or which ones you broke. The second story is worse, because I wasn't alone. I met Sam the year after I quit the security job. We worked together at a distribution warehouse, the kind that smells like cardboard and burnt coffee, all forklifts and bad lighting. It was loud, exhausting, and reassuringly normal. Sam was the kind of person who laughed easily and noticed things other people missed, which I would later understand was not a coincidence. The first time I mentioned the night shift story, it was as a joke. We were on break, sitting on pallets, complaining about supervisors. I said something about rules that never made sense. Sam stopped chewing and asked me what rule. Not laughed. Asked. I told a trimmed version, careful and casual, leaving out the parts that still made my hands shake. Sam listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded once and said, quietly, that his old apartment building had the same rule posted in the basement. Don't approach anyone after midnight. Call it in. Wait. I laughed, because that was easier than admitting how fast my stomach dropped. We compared details like we were troubleshooting a machine. Lighting issues, camera blind spots, times when things felt delayed. Sam mentioned hearing doors closed that never opened. I mentioned waking up at exact times without alarms. Normal life wrapped around the conversation anyway. We talked about weekend plans, a movie, drinks, the weather. The warehouse shift ended and nothing followed us out. That almost convinced me it was nothing. Almost. 2 weeks later, Sam called me at 2:43 in the morning. He didn't say hello. He asked me if I was awake, and when I said yes, he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. He said someone was standing in his hallway, just outside. His apartment door, not knocking. I drove there without thinking. By the time I arrived, the hallway was empty. Sam looked pale, shaking, but trying to smile it off. He said the building manager claimed the cameras were down. I said nothing. I was busy noticing the exit sign flicker when Sam stepped back. We tried to rationalize it out loud, because saying normal explanations felt like armor. Pipes settling. Someone on another floor. A prank. Sam joked that maybe his building was haunted by an introvert. The joke landed wrong. The sound answered with a soft shift, like weight moving where it shouldn't. He told me details he hadn't mentioned on the phone. How the hallway clock lagged behind his watch. How the elevator skipped his floor but still chimed. How the security mirror at the end of the hall showed the lights on even when they were off. I told him about the man on the camera. Sam went quiet. That silence felt heavier than panic. Sam asked me questions I didn't want to answer. What time did it appear? Did it ever rush? Did it speak first? I told him the truth, which was worse than reassurance. I told him it waited. I told him it learned. We laughed again after that, forced and brittle. We made plans to get food, to not be there anymore. Sam grabbed his keys, then stopped. He said the hallway sounded different when both of us were quiet. We stood still, counting breaths, listening to something that seemed to listen back. I noticed the stairwell door was no longer fully closed. Sam swore it had been. The gap was small, polite, like an invitation. From inside came that same pressure I remembered from years earlier, the sense of attention without urgency. Sam whispered my name like a question. That was when I saw what Sam had already noticed. Our reflections in the dark glass didn't move when we did. They stayed perfectly still, facing us, waiting for us to realize we weren't alone anymore. The lights dimmed slightly, not enough to trigger alarms, just enough to feel deliberate. Sam grabbed my arm and whispered that something had shifted without moving. In that shared stillness, we understood the same impossible truth. Safety in numbers meant nothing here. Whatever was watching had already finished learning us, counting breaths, memorizing habits, waiting patiently for the moment we finally realized we were never alone. It felt less like discovery and more like being acknowledged for the first time, by something that had always been there, quietly watching us. Both. Once we admitted it was real, everything changed. Fear is chaotic, but confirmation is orderly. Sam and I stopped asking why and started asking when. Not out of bravery, but because patterns feel safer than mystery. If it followed rules, then maybe it could be anticipated, maybe avoided. We wrote things down. Times first, always between midnight and 5. Peaks around 2:43, sometimes drifting a few minutes later, never earlier. Locations next. Transitional spaces. Hallways. Stairwells. Parking structures. Places meant for passing through, not staying. It never appeared in open rooms. It never appeared outside unless there were walls nearby. That detail mattered to Sam. He circled it twice. Behavior was harder. It never rushed, never touched, never forced entry. It waited to be acknowledged. Cameras glitched only when someone was watching them. Lights dimmed, but never fully failed. Every action felt restrained, like it was operating under guidelines we couldn't see. We tested small things without saying it out loud. Sam stayed up past 5 one night. Nothing happened. I slept through 2:43 another night. No call. When we broke routine accidentally, it adjusted. When we followed routine deliberately, it appeared earlier, closer. That was when Sam noticed the phrase. He showed me screenshots from forums I hadn't seen yet. Posts archived and reposted before deletion. Different usernames. Different cities. Same wording buried in paragraphs like an afterthought. Don't approach alone. Stay where you are. Someone is on the way. The phrasing was identical, down to the punctuation. Someone had written the rules before we learned them. We started to suspect we weren't the first. Maybe not even early. Sam joked that it felt like being late to a meeting everyone else pretended never happened. The joke faded quickly. There were signs of moderation that didn't make sense. Threads locked without explanation. Comments removed mid-sentence. Accounts vanishing after asking specific questions about waiting, about doors, about schedules. It felt less like censorship and more like cleanup. Sam said something one night that I still replay in my head. He said, "What if this is why the rules exist? Not to protect us, To keep it predictable. That idea settled badly. Predictability favors the thing that has more time. We found symbols too. Not obvious ones. Just shapes that repeated. A rectangle with one corner missing. Exit signs caught mid-flicker. Doorways half-framed in reflections. Sam started seeing them in places unrelated to the events, like the system was leaking through. The worst part was the waiting again. It never escalated the way horror stories promise. No chase, no reveal, just confirmation after confirmation that it was paying attention, that our notes, our tests, our late-night theories were being factored in. We weren't hiding. We were participating. Sam stopped sleeping at his apartment. He said the hallway felt closer every night, like distance was negotiable if you gave it enough time. I believed him because my own place had started feeling observant. Corners held longer than they should. Reflections lagged half a second behind. We argued about what to do next. Ignore it and hope it loses interest. Or confront it and force a response. Sam believed rules only mattered if someone enforced them. He said maybe breaking one on purpose would change things. Reset something. Prove we still had agency. I told him that was a terrible idea. I reminded him what waiting looked like. Sam smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes and said maybe waiting was the point. Maybe it needed permission again. Maybe the rules were there to stop us from giving it exactly what it wanted. That night, without telling me, Sam stepped into the hallway at 2:43 a.m. and spoke first. Sam called me once after that night. Just once. The call connected without ringing, like it had been waiting. All I could hear was breathing, slow and careful, as if someone was practicing. I said his name. I said it twice. The breathing paused, adjusted, and then matched mine perfectly. When I stopped, it stopped. When I whispered hello, something repeated the sound without using the word. Then the call ended. I drove to his apartment before sunrise. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything looked normal in the way staged rooms do. Shoes by the wall. Keys on the table. Coffee still warm in the mug like time had stalled out of politeness. Sam was gone. No sign of a struggle. No note. No explanation that fit into language. The building manager said Sam had moved out weeks ago. Showed me paperwork with dates that didn't match my phone, my messages, my memory. The police told me I was mistaken about the timeline. According to them, Sam had never worked at the warehouse. Our photos together existed, but metadata said I took them alone. I checked the hallway camera feeds myself that night. I shouldn't have been able to access them. But there it was. Footage from 2:43 a.m. Sam standing in the hall, facing something just out of frame. He was talking, nodding, listening. Then the lights dimmed. The footage glitched. When it returned, Sam was still there. But his reflection in the glass behind him wasn't. It faced the camera instead. After that, the evidence unraveled. Messages vanished. Screenshots corrupted. Links redirected to nothing. The forums went quiet. Not deleted. Quiet. Like they were waiting to be needed again. I kept one thing. A voicemail that shouldn't exist. Sam's voice saying my name, stretched slightly wrong, followed by a pause that feels crowded when you listen too closely. I still play it sometimes. I don't know why. Maybe to prove I didn't imagine him. Maybe to remind myself what it costs to notice patterns. The world didn't end. Nothing dramatic happened. Sam just stopped answering. That's the part no one warns you about. Survival doesn't mean escape. It means you stay long enough to remember what everyone else forgets. I stopped researching after that. I stopped looking for rules. I stopped asking questions that might get answered. Because something had already learned how to respond. If you're still listening, you should stop. I mean that sincerely. Every word I speak adds weight, draws attention, and I don't know who or what is keeping count. There's comfort in shared fear, yes, but there's danger too. The more you engage, the more you invite yourself in. I've seen comments vanish mid-thread. Accounts disappear after asking simple questions. Patterns I thought were mine alone became public, then gone. And yet, you're still here. You're part of it now, whether you like it or not. I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying it because the stories are already moving. They react. They wait. They test. And somehow, your curiosity fuels them too. If you leave, nothing changes. If you stay, well, then you'll see what happens when someone decides to break the quiet rules. I didn't want to tell this one because it removes the last comfortable distance between me and you. The others happened to me, around me, adjacent to my life. This one happens inside it. By the time it began, I already knew. Meant I couldn't pretend ignorance when I broke them. I knew about waiting. I knew about time windows and transitional spaces. I knew what it meant when a room felt attentive. Knowing doesn't make you safer. It just makes the fear quieter and heavier. This started after Sam disappeared, when silence stopped feeling empty and started feeling deliberate. I moved apartments. New city. New routines. I avoided night shifts, avoided cameras, avoided mirrors when I could. I followed the rules like superstition. Midnight meant lights on. Hallways meant headphones off. If something felt wrong, I stayed still. For a while, nothing happened, and that scared me more than activity ever did. The first sign was small. A delay in my reflection that lasted a fraction too long. A notification sound with no message. I dismissed them because I wanted to believe restraint still mattered, that the rules rewarded obedience. I built my life around being predictable, around not standing out. Acceptance felt like survival. Then you started appearing. Not you specifically, not yet. Comments, messages, emails from strangers who somehow knew the details I never shared publicly. They asked careful questions, the same way Sam had. They used familiar phrases. They apologized for bothering me. Every time I replied, something in my apartment shifted. Not physically, conceptually. Corners felt closer. Doorways felt expectant. I stopped responding, but it didn't stop. The messages adjusted. They referenced things I'd said out loud alone. Things I'd only thought. One of them asked me what time it was where I lived, and my phone glitched when I read it. When it came back, the time read 2:43. Even though the sun was up, that was when I realized the mistake. I had assumed observation required proximity. Cameras. Hallways. Shared spaces. I was wrong. Attention doesn't need walls. It needs access. And I had been giving it freely, answering questions, reinforcing patterns, teaching it how to reach without. I tried to cut everything off. Deleted accounts. Changed numbers. Lived quieter. It didn't chase. It waited the same way it always had. The rules still applied, but they had expanded. The boundary wasn't the building anymore. It was awareness. The first time I felt it react in real time was when I considered stopping this recording. Not acting, just thinking. The room tightened, like pressure adjusting. My monitor dimmed slightly. Somewhere in the apartment, a door settled into its frame. Acceptance crept in slowly. Terror burns hot and fast. Acceptance lingers. I understood then that the pattern needed witnesses. Not victims. Participants. People who would notice, document, share. People like me. People like you. I can feel the difference now when someone is listening closely. It's subtle, like a shift in air pressure before a storm, or the way a room sounds different when a television has been muted. The awareness sharpens. The waiting tightens. It's not malicious. That's the worst part. It feels procedural, like something executing a process it was designed to perform, patiently, without judgment, without urgency. I used to think terror was the goal, that fear was the end state. Now I understand fear is just feedback. Attention is the resource. Patterns are the currency. And once you see that, once you feel it responding, you realize how carefully this was always designed to scale. That realization alone was enough to make my hands shake as I kept talking anyway. Even now, especially now. That's why this story feels heavier than the others. You aren't just hearing it, you're continuing it. Every second you stay, every detail you remember, reinforces the shape of something that prefers patience over force. I don't know what happens next. I only know that the rules didn't stop it. They prepared us. And when that thought settled, I felt the last illusion of distance collapse, because the pattern didn't end with me noticing you. It began when you noticed me. I hear it now. Not outside, not in some hallway. Here, with me, listening, responding. Every word I say adjusts the pressure, shifts the light, tilts the air. I can feel it learning my pauses, my breaths, the way I hesitate before admitting what I already know. The first rule I forgot was that observation is consent. That's what I finally understand. Talking aloud, narrating, describing, it's not protection. It's instruction. I should have stopped before this sentence. I shouldn't have named it, given it shape with my words, given you access through me. But I didn't. I kept talking. A notification pops up. I don't check it. I know it's not random. I know it's part of the pattern. My reflection in the monitor lags a fraction. Too long. My chair creaks in response to nothing. The room hums differently, subtly, as if it's confirming my presence. Every time I glance at the door, I feel its patience, the precise timing of its awareness. Not aggression, not threat in the conventional sense. Just attentiveness, a calculation that has been running for years, expanded now to include this moment, this recording, this listener. I can feel you noticing. I know you are. And with that, the last rule becomes clear. Watching, acknowledging, remembering. Any of it makes you part of the system. Too late to turn back. Too late to stop the pattern. I am inside it. You are inside it. And yet I speak, because stopping would be the same as denying it exists. Speaking is all I can do, even as the pressure tightens and the room itself seems to lean in, waiting for the next word, the next breath, the next mistake. It listens. It always listens. And now, through this recording, so do you. If this uploads, then I guess I misjudged how patient it really is. Or maybe this is exactly what it wanted. I'm not going to promise you safety. I can't even promise this will stay here. All I can do is thank you for listening, for paying attention, for noticing the parts most people scroll past. If you have theories, leave them. If you recognize a rule, say it out loud. Compare notes while you still can. Shared fear isn't comfort, but it is information, and information seems to matter. If this disappears, if comments vanish, if accounts go quiet, you'll know why. Not because I was wrong, but because something finally finished listening. You should leave now. That warning still stands. It always did. But if you don't, if you stay curious, if you keep watching, then understand this wasn't the beginning.